Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. I really need a growth spurt on this channel if I'm going to continue, so please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, share the channel on other channels with your friends, with your family. Growth has been slow here and I got to make some decisions. And if you really want to support our community, you can join my Patreon. We have a really big goal there and I will talk about that at the end of the video. Come one, come all, back to the never-ending shit show of kooky offshoot Mormon weirdos and their wacky, dangerous beliefs. Just when I think things might start to settle down here in Utah, I am wrong again. That's okay, I'm wrong a lot, so I'm used to it. Today's story has so many of the same themes as the Lori and Chad Daybell story, the Ruby Frankie and Jody Hildebrandt story, the Children of Thunder story, but it seems because of social media and people being on high alert lately, because of these other crazy stories, the train of events that usually ends in death or serious injury may have been stopped in time, this time. Knock on wood, sprinkle some holy water, say a prayer to Bigfoot that it stays that way, because honey, this one is wild. My telling of this story is going to be a bit different from others I've seen because, as most of you know, I am an ex-Mormon. I was born and raised into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I left when I was about 38 years old. I'm 53 now. My journey out of the church damn near killed me, and I'm very proud of the work I've done to overcome the anger and grief that once consumed me when I was first leaving. But as this is my story, every time I talk about Mormonism, my telling of the tale will surely be colored by my own feelings, and so I feel it's only fair to be transparent about that. Additionally, I have some insight into these stories that most people do not have, and I see things in these stories, similarities and likenesses to elements of Mormonism that I am very familiar with, and I will talk about those similarities as we go, in hopes that my comparisons will give you an insight as to why these things keep happening around Mormonism. I will be talking about some personal things here today. That's what I do here. If you want a news report, honey, this ain't the channel for you. I am not a journalist. This is not a news channel. This is a place for people like me, true crime and cult enthusiasts, to talk about the stories that fascinate us all. I'm just the person who starts the conversation. And today, have I got a conversation starter for you. We got angels, we got demons, we got hellfire and damnation, and we've got a real life warrior for Christ, raised up by a mother convinced he was sent to us on earth by God to usher in the second coming of Jesus. Buckle your seatbelts, because we are about to go on a ride with the Mormon Apocalypse Mom. I'm Stacy Lee, your host. Let's get into it. Because there are several stories involving people who have these very extreme fringe doomsday beliefs that are centered around Mormon doctrine, I have chosen to start this episode by outlining those beliefs, how they are rooted in Mormon scripture, and why these types of people are becoming more and more deranged and deluded and dangerous. The first thing we need to talk about today is the group known as a vow. That's AVOW, and it stands for Another Voice of Warning. It sounds like a fun group. A vow is a Mormon extremist doomsday group that lives a prepper lifestyle, and the people inside the group have some very wild beliefs. Like most things all extremists believe, no matter what side of the spectrum they're on, the basis of their belief is founded in some sort of mainstream thought. A vow teaches the fundamental Mormon doctrine, but there is an extreme emphasis on being prepared for the end of the world. In the 1960s, a Mormon author, Dwayne S. Crowther, wrote a book called Prophecy, Key to the Future. At that time, 60 or so years ago, the book caused a stir as it was seen as extremist and fringe, and it violated one of the most sacred and important tenets of Mormonism, and that is this: Mormons believe that they are allowed and able to receive personal revelation from God, but that any revelation they receive is for them and them only, and they are not to share that revelation or try to get others to believe in their personal revelations. Now, the reason for this is obvious. You can't have more than one Mormon prophet telling people what to do. There has to be a leader when you have a religion. Mormons believe that their prophet talks to God. The prophet is to be followed absolutely and without question. That is probably the number one rule of Mormonism. You follow exactly what the prophet says. There is no questioning the prophet. So when someone writes a book wherein they share their own revelations and guidelines, it's a big problem for the mainstream Mormon church. The following that Crowther's book had was very small, but it survived, and over the decades, it has grown. I could not find an exact year or date that the group Avow formally began, but it has to have been about 20 to 25 years ago. And what happened was this. Another author named Roger K. Young, who knew about the book Prophecy, A Key to the Future, he knew it backwards and forwards, he becomes very involved in the fringe Mormon prepper lifestyle. In 1990, Roger wrote a book called As a Thief in the Night, and in 1995, the book kind of blew up in those circles. The book is about the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Mormon version of the second coming. If you are not familiar with Christianity, Christians believe that Jesus Christ will return to the earth to usher in the apocalypse, the righteous will be saved, and the wicked will be condemned. But before that final judgment, there will be a period of time where the earth is in turmoil. They believe that there will be massive food shortages, famine, illness, disease, death, every bad thing you can imagine. So if you're Mormon and you want to avoid suffering during this period of terrible times, because you believe that you're going to be spared for when Jesus comes back, you are going to want to be prepared. Now, I have said this before and I will say it again. I am not going to live underground fighting for Twinkies. If the bombs come, or the angels, or the comets, or whatever it is, I will pull up a lawn chair and turn on some Tool and drink a beer and take me out. I am an agnostic person. I don't even know if there's life after this. So I'm always confused as to why people that are so damn sure there is paradise waiting for them, they're afraid to die. The math does not math for me, but what do I know? I'm a godless heathen. But these people want to have years of food stored. They want to have their own generators, their own water supply, their own shelter, plenty of weapons because they're going to shoot the demons. I don't know. As Roger's following grew, he began to give presentations preaching his beliefs on what was coming and how the righteous could be prepared for the terrible times ahead. Then Roger began to promote his vision and his dreams in which he claims he was being led by God and Jesus. Now remember, God and Jesus are two different people in Mormonism. Mormons do not believe in the Trinity. They do not believe that God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost are the same being. They're three separate beings in Mormonism. Roger started saying that God was giving him certain information and Jesus was giving him certain information, and I mean he's got a direct line to all that is divine. Why? Because Roger is very special. Remember, these people are always very, very special. They aren't like you and I. They are chosen by God and they are very special. Roger also talked about the fact that members of his group were having their own dreams and their own visions of what was to come. And the core belief became that when the last days approach, the leaders of the Mormon church will call upon Roger and his followers to assist the righteous in taking their masses of food storage and supplies to go and live alone in the hills where they'll be safe. Can somebody tell me where you're safe from nuclear fallout? Because I'm pretty sure it ain't the hills. I'm going to try to contain myself. I'll be good. This is just a very basic and short explanation of these Mormon prepper beliefs. There's a lot more detail. We'll touch on it a little bit as we go, but we don't have time to get into their full scope of beliefs today. Now, full disclosure, I still live by the Mormon tenet of having a year's worth of food storage, and I also have a 72-hour survival kit. I don't think you're crazy just because you acknowledge that something might happen where our food or water supplies are cut off and you need to be self-sufficient for a time. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, or the desire to be self-sufficient. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies with the extremism and the fanaticism, which is, let's face it, always the case. Now, a vow isn't the only element to the Mormon prepper belief system, and different extremists believe in a vow on different levels. I've read that, for example, Lori and Chad Daybell didn't even get into a vow until very late in their, what the hell do you even call their deal, their story, whereas the people we're talking about today have been more heavily involved with the vow movement for a while. But what's important to know is this. Mormons are very concerned with and centered around the idea that Jesus Christ is going to return to the earth. Those of you who have been here for a while have heard me say this before. All great con artists' lies are rooted in truth to some degree. That's what makes them great con artists. Same applies to extremists and cult leaders and members. What they believe is rooted in some sort of mainstream theology or philosophy, but they tend to cling to one or two elements of that mainstream belief and go off the rails with one of those elements or two of those elements. If you remember from this episode, the LeBaron cult murders, they clung to the doctrine of blood atonement, believing that the only way to save a person's soul who had gone astray was to kill them, spilling their blood on the ground. That's what's known as blood atonement in the Book of Mormon, and it's obviously not something that's practiced in mainstream Mormonism, but that's what they clung to. The Doomsday Mormons cling not to that bit of doctrine, but instead to the bit of doctrine that instructs Mormons to be prepared for the second coming. It's also really important to keep in mind whenever we talk about Mormonism that the Mormon Church has a very long and complicated relationship with the federal government. And part of the instruction to be prepared is so that you don't have to rely on the government. Because when you have a little bit of food and some barrels of water and some weapons, you don't need the roads to drive on that the government pays for, the cell phone towers that the government... We all rely on the government. We're trying to have a society here. It would be nice if everybody remembered that. Along with the belief in extreme prepping for the apocalypse, these types of Mormons, and again, this is not mainstream Mormonism, their beliefs are rooted in the same teachings. Along with the prepping comes the belief in the 144,000. You've probably heard about that if you followed the Lori and Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, the 144,000. So let's talk about that for a moment. Mormons believe in the Doctrine and Covenants. It is an additional scripture to the Bible, to the Book of Mormon, and to the Pearl of Great Price. Like the three Mormon scriptures, it is said to have been given to Joseph Smith on gold plates by an angel. The Doctrine and Covenants is delineated by sections and not chapters. Now, I'm going to tell you something I did not know until I did this research. This is what the Doctrine and Covenants looks like, very much like the Bible. There's a number and then there's a verse in each chapter, except for section 77. I didn't know this. I'm no scholar here, okay? I was never like that. Look at section 77. Look how different this looks. At first I went online and I thought, this isn't how the Doctrine and Covenants is written. So then I downloaded the Mormon Scriptures app and it said the same thing. So then I called my sister who pulled out her actual book, her paper scriptures. I've long since gotten rid of mine, and read that on the paper scriptures, it appears the same way. My mind was blown. She's had that book for 30 years. What I'm telling you is section 77 looks completely different than any other section in Mormon scriptures. So that alone makes it something that zealots would cling to. You know what I mean? This particular section of the Doctrine and Covenants, and only this section, is not written in verse 1, verse 2, verse 3. It is written in question and answer form, and I find that very interesting. Religious zealots tend to see signs in everything, so I can definitely see how they would kind of glom on to one section that's written differently. Here's what it says regarding the 144,000, and then we will go into why it matters. Doctrine and Covenants, section 77, verse 11. Question: what are we to understand by sealing the 144,000 out of all the tribes of Israel, 12,000 out of every tribe? Answer: we are to understand that those who are sealed are high priests ordained unto the holy order of God to administer the everlasting gospel. For they are they who are ordained out of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, but the angels to whom is given power over the nations of the earth to bring as many as will come to the church of the firstborn. Woo, child, that's been a while since I read scriptures. Now, what does that mean? In Mormonism, you are taught that in the pre-existence, which was your life before you came to earth, you belonged to one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes comes from Jacob's 12 sons, who were the originators of the house of Israel. When you have what is called your patriarchal blessing in Mormonism, you are told what tribe you are from. I am from the tribe of Enoch. Your patriarchal blessing is, this makes people upset when I say this, it's kind of like your fortune, your destiny. You fast and you pray and you're worthy, and then you go to a man who is designated the state patriarch, and he puts his hands on your head and gives you a blessing and tells you what the Lord has in store for you. He tells you what your gifts are, what you're good at, and what the future holds for you to some degree, if you are righteous. But your patriarchal blessing is a big deal in Mormonism, and that's usually when you find out what tribe of Israel you're from. In Revelations, in the Bible, the 144,000 is mentioned as well. But in that book, the 144,000 are all male and they're all virgins. In Mormonism, they are all high priests. It doesn't mention virgins, but high priests can only be men. Women cannot hold the priesthood in Mormonism. So how people like Lori Vallow, for example, believed she was one of the 144,000, you'd have to ask her. Just one of the many things she's very, very wrong on. Mormons don't believe that the 144,000 can be female, so technically she's wrong. But the 144,000, according to the Bible and according to Doctrine and Covenants, are extremely righteous men who were ordained by angels and given power over the nations of the land. These people are special. They are always very, very special. Lori and Chad Daybell believed that they were part of the 144,000 and that it was their job to gather the rest of the 144,000 righteous people. Now, this is confusing to me. If God is so all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful, why does he need people to help him do anything? Because, my friends, how else are people going to state their importance and their specialness? How else are they going to feel superior to other people? That's what this is all about, tribalism and superiority to others. But to this group of Mormon zealots, the concept of the 144,000 is very, very important, and these beliefs intersect with the belief in the apocalypse. Because obviously, if someone believes they are among the 144,000, that means they're going to survive the apocalypse. That means they need to be prepared for the apocalypse. I hope that kind of overview has helped you to understand a little more this belief structure and why we are seeing so many people flocking to this strange belief that they've got to hurry and gather the like-minded thinkers and prepare for the end. There have always been doomsday people, but I feel like because the world is so much more connected now with the internet, people see plagues and wars and mudslides and floods and tsunamis. We didn't used to be so aware of all of those things that were happening. Those things aren't happening more now than they've ever happened. I actually went to a lecture on all of this, but because we see them now, we believe they're happening more. They're not. And I think that has a lot to do with why there are so many people that think the end is nigh. I know the story of the religion I was brought up in is very foreign to most of you, very familiar to people like me. But if you're fascinated with cults like I am, and I know a lot of you are, I truly feel it's important to understand and discuss not just the wacky behavior, but what it's rooted in. The same way I feel it's important to understand and discuss the psychology behind criminals and not just the crimes they commit. So where does all this bring us for today's episode? It brings us to a kidnapping, to another criminal act performed in the name of God by people who wield his name and abuse their power as parents. It brings us to Spring Thibaudeau, and it brings us to her brother, her daughter, and their victim, her son Blaze. First, let's talk about Blaze, the victim in this story. Blaze is a 16-year-old boy who lives in Gilbert, Arizona. For those of you who might not be aware of this, Arizona has a very large Mormon population. There are parts of Arizona that actually have a higher percentage of Mormons in the towns than in Utah. And for whatever reason, a lot of the zealotry and craziness we are seeing from offshoot Mormons is coming out of Arizona. I mean, I have some theories on that, but Blaze attends Gilbert High School, and his father describes him as a regular teenager who likes sports and TV and being on his phone. His father says Blaze has never ascribed to any wild beliefs and that he has tried on numerous occasions to distance himself from his mother and her very, very ridiculous statements and beliefs. Let's talk about her. Spring Thibaudeau is an active member in good standing of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, that may have changed in the last couple of weeks, but she was until then. She was in such good standing that she was, until just weeks ago when all of this happened, a temple worker. Only Mormons of the highest standing are allowed inside the Mormon temples. You must be following all the tenets of Mormonism. It's a very high demand religion, and you must give 10% of your gross income to the church. There are many requirements in order to be able to go inside the temple and participate in, they call them ordinances, rituals, rites, whatever you want to call them. And yes, I have been inside the temple many, many times. And yes, I have taken part in every one of the ordinances, except one that is supposed to be a secret. It's not a well-kept one anymore. It's called the second anointing. That is something that's only available to men, and it's something that active Mormons will deny even exists, but it does. If you want to hear more about that, I'll do like a mini episode or something. It's really quite fascinating. But anyways, to be a temple worker, you have to be at the top of the top percentage of Mormons that are even allowed inside the temples. And Spring Thibaudeau was. I just realized you don't know what a temple worker is. As you go through the temple and perform these, I keep wanting to say rites, ordinances, there are people that help you and guide you through it. You move from section to section. There are things that happen in one room, things that happen in another room, and there are people that assist you in the way. I'm trying to be respectful of the religion because they consider this sacred. A lot of people say secret. It's all on the internet if you want to see it now, but I'm walking a fine line here. Not for me personally. I'm just trying to be respectful. But even though Spring was a Mormon in good standing, she was also part of this very extreme offshoot group of Mormons that believe the apocalypse is right around the corner. Let's briefly talk about the other players in this story. We have Spring's brother, Brooke Hale, who thinks and believes like his sister Spring does. They're both in their late 40s. We have Blaze's sister, Abigail Thibaudeau Snarr, who believes like Spring does. I think Abby's in her early 20s. And then we obviously have Blaze, who does not believe. Then the last character in the story is Blaze's father, Ben. Ben Thibaudeau filed for divorce from Spring Thibaudeau in early October. His wife Spring's beliefs had become so wild and so extreme that they had damaged the marriage beyond repair. Now, Spring got into this line of thinking way back in 2015, which is a little disturbing to me for a couple of reasons. And yes, I realize what I'm about to say is judgmental, and I also realize that it was probably a slow side. So I'm not trying to judge Ben, but it's a little disturbing to me that it took 8 years for a divorce to happen. Maybe she just got really, really extreme in the last little while. I don't know. And like I say, I realize that's me judging. What bothers me more, as an ex-Mormon who knows the rules, is knowing that this woman with these insane beliefs was allowed to continue in good standing inside Mormonism for so long. That's a different conversation, and I realize that, but that is bothersome to me. It says that the church has changed since I've left it 15, 16 years ago. That would not have been tolerated back then. The church is losing lots and lots of members, and I almost feel like they're trying to hold on to those that they have and letting things slide that they wouldn't normally let slide. Like I say, it's no skin off my nose at this point. I'm out. But I think there's always that tinge of just like, well, I had to do this and I had to do this and you don't have to do that and you don't have to do that. You know, it's just human nature. But I do know that Ben and Spring had been going to counseling for years, but it was church counseling through an ecclesiastical leader, which is something I don't think is that helpful when you're having marriage problems. When you are inside a group, a high demand religion, seeking counseling from someone who is also in that group, it's just, you're not getting the outside help that you need. And I'll just leave it at that. Now, to this counselor's credit, they did tell Spring that she must reevaluate her extreme beliefs if she wanted her marriage to survive. Instead, Spring started buying enormous amounts of survival material. She started spending money the family didn't have. I think they're pretty well off, but like exorbitant amounts of money on food prep, cold weather gear, which they live in Arizona. You know, you'll see the reason for that in a minute, but like camping supplies and long range radios, things like that. Ben and Spring Thibaudeau have 5 children, but the only one that really subscribes to Spring's way of thinking is 23-year-old Abigail, and she is married. Her last name is now Snarr. I'll talk a little bit more about Abigail and her husband in a moment. So even though Blaze does not believe in his mother's delusions, and she has a child that does, Abigail, that does Spring no good, because Abigail is a female. And in Mormonism, females are never the actual leaders, and they cannot hold the priesthood. So Spring has a dilemma. If she is going to make herself out to be the mother of a very special child who's going to bring in the important people that are going to help during the apocalypse, it has to be a male child. This is something I haven't seen anybody touch on. They keep saying, well, if Abigail believed, because it doesn't work that way. Abigail does her no good. Whether Blaze believes in his mother's words or not, she's going to use him to become this very special figure in her world and in her way of thinking because she needs a male. Spring has decided in her mind that she has this really important calling from God, and she is going to make it come true, hell or high water. Spring has decided that she is the mother to a Davidic servant. A Davidic servant is a chosen individual who plays a very significant role in the return of the Savior, Jesus Christ. If you ask a mainstream Mormon, they will tell you that people like Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell and Spring Thibaudeau take the figure of the Davidic servant way out of context. Now, if you ask them, they're just reading the scriptures and interpreting them as they've been written. Lori Vallow believed she was a Davidic servant. Same for Chad Daybell and others like them. But to Spring, her son Blaze plays an even more important role in this celestial event. Spring believes that Blaze is going to be one of the souls chosen to actually usher Christ back to the earth when the apocalypse is over. And for that reason, Blaze must be protected. He must be protected and he must be prepared for this great task at hand. Spring believes she must take Blaze and secret him away because you see, my friends, in Spring's mind, the apocalypse is starting, I think 10 days ago. I think the apocalypse was supposed to be 10 days ago. Did you miss it? I missed it. I mean, I feel the same. I think I'm still here. Like, I have been accused of being delusional. So, maybe I'm delusional, but I swear I'm here. So all of this comes to a head the first week of October when Ben files for divorce and informs the court that he is seeking custody of Blaze because he is afraid of what his wife is going to do, and he's afraid she may take Blaze. This is so sadly reminiscent of poor Charles Vallow, poor murdered Charles Vallow, who tried to get the police involved and warn them that his wife was crazy and she was going to do something to the kids, and now those kids are dead. So I feel very sorry for people like this who are stuck with a crazy partner and can't seem to get the help that they want. That must just be horrible. Yes, maybe they wait a little too long to get really serious about getting help. But think about what a difficult position that would be in. You have this person, you're married to them, you love them, but you're slowly watching them slide into madness. I feel for them. I do. So after Ben files for divorce, Spring the mother, her brother Brooke, who would be Blaze's uncle, and Spring's daughter, Abigail, Blaze's sister, prepare. For what? A kidnapping. They are going to take Blaze, their cold weather gear, their year's worth of food storage, their prepper materials, and they are going to head to the border. The sunny shores of Mexico for the apocalypse, where I would go? No, they're going to Alaska. The details of exactly how the kidnapping went down have not been released yet, but on Wednesday, October 25th, Ben Thibaudeau reported that his son was missing. I'm not sure why the report was filed on the 25th because the event when Blaze disappeared was actually October 23rd. Ben received a phone call from his son-in-law, Abigail's husband, Braden Snarr, on October 23rd, and Braden said, "Ben, our worst nightmares have come true. They're gone." Braden tells Ben that Spring, Blaze, and Abby have flown from Phoenix to Boise, Idaho, and that Brooke, Spring's brother, is going to meet them there at the airport. This is what Braden told Ben next.
At about 10:30 a.m., he had noticed the Ring doorbell on their apartment had been taken off, and he thought that was strange. So he knocked on the door, and Abby let him in. And she was in the process of packing luggage with all kinds of winter gear, survival gear, camouflage. And he asked her obviously what she was doing, and she said, "We need to go. We need to leave now." And she explained where they were going and that they wanted him to come, that Brooke had bought tickets for all of them, and that they needed to leave immediately. He resisted and said, I do not want to go. My daughter was emotional. Braden was emotional. They called Brooke. Brooke tried to persuade him, shared some dreams with him, shared some scriptures with him, told him he needed to be like Zoram, who followed Lehi and his family into the wilderness, and to just have faith. Braden felt very uncomfortable. He, in the moment, just was so shocked. He said that he needed to get out of there. He walked out of the apartment, went down the stairs, went and sat in his car that was parked in the apartment parking lot. He noticed that my wife was there in her car with Blaze in the front seat. As he sat in his car, he saw Abby come down with all the luggage. They put the luggage into the back of the car and they drove away. This all happened around 11 a.m. Arizona time.
Immediately, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents were alerted because Ben had information that his wife and daughter, along with his brother-in-law and son, might be headed towards the northern border. Details on the investigation are still sketchy. This all happened just days before I'm writing this episode. That's the conundrum of bringing you guys the breaking stories. I keep you informed, but I don't always have all the details. But I do want you to see Braden Snarr talking about the day that the group left.
I guess parts of it have started to feel real for me. Emotion is more and more setting in, and but honestly still in shock that we're in this situation as a family. When my wife opened the door, the apartment was a mess. She had gone and purchased a bunch of hunting, utility, camping gear from a local sportsman's warehouse. And in utter shock, she told me that it's time to go, that it's time for us to leave, and that I need to go with her.
And what did you think?
In that moment, I was just baffled. Over the last year and a half, I know that my wife, my mother-in-law, and her uncle had been having dreams and witnesses that the end times are near, that Jesus is going to come again, which is a foundational belief that I have as a Christian. And as things have been happening, I could see in the world that it's not a great place. But never did I ever expect this to happen. My wife, 6 or so months ago, mentioned to me, she was like, "Braden, if there was ever a time that we needed to go, would you be willing?" And my response to her was yes. I mean, if we were to be invaded by another country or our lives were in jeopardy, I would obviously not be in Phoenix and in my apartment. I would leave, thinking that's what she meant by that. But Monday morning was a complete shock to me as she told me that it was time to go.
Later on, Braden reveals that his wife Abigail wrote to him saying, "If you're still around in a few years when this is all over, then I'll see you then." Wow. So she was basically saying, when the apocalypse is over and Jesus comes back, if you were worthy enough to survive, I'll see you then. But until then, peace out. For several days, law enforcement is on the hunt for Spring, Brooke, Abigail, and Blaze. The FBI also becomes involved because this is an interstate kidnapping. Spring was labeled a non-custodial parent, which makes this matter much more serious. The FBI reported to the media that Spring, Blaze, and Abby were last seen at the Boise airport, and they believe they might be flying out of Canada next. As law enforcement searched, the internet does what the internet does, and well, as people who knew Spring hear about what happened, more information begins to come out about her beliefs. Spring is a devoted and fanatical believer in energy healing, because of course she is. She is an avid anti-vaxxer, because of course she is. And she is very into early Mormon rituals called washings. If you want me to go into that, I could do washings and the second anointing at the same time if you're interested. Washings is what it sounds like. All of these things are currently outside of mainstream Mormon beliefs. They used to be a bigger part of it. But I think one of the things that triggered all these crazies is something nobody ever talks about. The Mormon prophet, the man who is currently the Mormon prophet, is literally a heart surgeon. And during the pandemic, when everybody was whining about vaccinations and things like that, he posted a photo of himself getting a vaccine. This threw the Q anti-vax Mormon people into a frenzy because they can't reconcile the one tenet of Mormonism that you are taught first is to follow the prophet and do everything that he says. He's telling you to get a vaccine and they're against that. So they couldn't reconcile in their minds. And like I say, I hate doing politics here, but I don't actually think vaccinations are political. I think they're science. So whatever. But when I tell you I can bring some elements to you that you might not hear about anywhere else, I personally believe that when the prophet posted that photo of himself getting vaccinated, it's one of the things that flipped this switch and sent these kooks into kind of a downward spiral. Like the prophet isn't really the prophet, that kind of a deal. And now there's all these conspiracy theories that he's not the one true prophet. And, it makes my head hurt. Now, poor Blaze is just trying to be a normal kid. He plays football. His father even said when all this went down, Blaze had games left in the season that he was very much looking forward to playing in, and he would be upset about missing them. So I know this is a kooky story, and I'm the first one to make fun of all these kooky beliefs, but I feel really sorry for Blaze, and I feel for his father too. And I also feel for those kids that Spring just dumped off the other kids and was like, bye. How do you think those other kids feel? Like Blaze is the only one that matters and Abby's going because she's also crazy. And then they've got 3 other kids. They're just like, oh, our mom just abandoned us. Like, this is why I hate cults. They hurt so many more people than the person that joins the cult. If it was a bunch of people that just wanted to go off and live and not hurt anybody else and be crazy together, that would be one thing. That's not what happens. Ben's father actually told the media, I fear for Blaze's safety, especially if my son is contentious, rebellious, or belligerent. I fear that my brother-in-law would restrain him or do something that would incapacitate him. That is major. His dad was afraid that his brother-in-law might hurt Blaze or tie him up or something like that. That's horrible. And like I say, I'm just feeling so sorry for the other children that are wrapped up in this. The ripple effects of people that get into this crazy bullshit, they go on and on and on, and it's not fair. Now, a minute ago, I said I was going to tell you a little bit more about Abby and Braden. Abby did call her husband, Braden, from the Boise airport and begged him to get on a flight so he too could be saved from the impending apocalypse. But Braden refused. Abby calling Braden from the airport is actually caught on surveillance cameras. Supposedly, the footage has not been released. And my Lord, have I learned to double check and triple check all of the footage that I post, especially on TikTok. About got my throat torn out this week. Again this week. Ben discovered that Blaze had been pulled out of school under false pretenses before they left, and that Spring had also withdrawn large amounts of money from the couple's checking account. It was later discovered that Brooke Hale, Spring's brother, withdrew $150,000 from his account before the trip. He used that money to book the flights, and then as soon as the group met in Boise, they turned all of their cell phones off, got into a vehicle with Brooke, and drove to the Alaska-Canada border, and that is where they were finally caught. On October 28th, at the Alcan port of entry along the eastern Alaskan border, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents found Spring Thibaudeau, Abby Snarr, Brooke Hale, and Blaze Thibaudeau in their car. The vehicle was packed with cold weather gear, camping equipment, and food. Spring Thibaudeau was arrested and taken into custody for felony charges related to custodial interference. Brooke Hale was arrested and charged with the same. A judge then granted Benjamin Thibaudeau, the father, emergency custody for his son for the time being, and let's just hope that becomes permanent. This is just kind of an overview of everything pertinent that we know at this point. I will follow this wild story as it progresses, and I will update you as Spring and Brooke's legal battles continue. It will be very interesting to see if they choose to go to trial or if they take a plea deal. I have a very strong suspicion that the courts are going to go easy on them. Neither of them have a criminal record. They're in their late 40s, and also they're religious nuts in Arizona, white Mormon religious nuts in Arizona. I hope my cynical ass is wrong, but I don't think they're going to be treated the same way other people of different persuasions, skin tones, or belief systems would be treated in the same situation. I guess we'll have to wait and see. One thing I do know, and it's this: religious zealotry has caused more harm, more long-term psychological damage, and more death than anything else I can think of. There is nothing more dangerous than a person claiming to act for God because there's something I'm sure of. God only wants these people to do exactly what they want to do. And it's funny how that's always the case, isn't it? And it's also dangerous because, as we well know, sometimes people want to do very evil and terrible things. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death True Crime Tuesday. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and join my Patreon if you would like to support us. We are going to raise money to donate to police departments to have cold case DNA storage tested. There are thousands of sexual assault kits in refrigeration that have never been tested, and we want to raise money to donate to get some of those kits tested. Please share the channel. Please promote it if you are a subscriber and you want to support the community. I get a growth spurt and then nothing for months, and a growth spurt and nothing for months. And I told myself if I wasn't to a certain point by year 4, which is in May, I was going to be done, and I'm nowhere near there. So help me out where you can, and just know that your support means everything to me. If it weren't for those of you that watch, I would not be here. I would have stopped doing this a long time ago. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.